Okay, so now comes the really interesting part is, are these tokens in any form a different financing tool? Okay, so this is what we want to answer now for the next few minutes here. Now let's again just take it as an example and understand the amounts that have been raised and juxtapose it with what we have seen, what we see in normal markets. So since January 2016, about 31 billion went into about 1,700 early startups. Okay, so this is collected at a different time compared to the table that I showed earlier. Let's just take this number. Now the TMX venture market, this is one of the most successful markets for junior firms in the world, has a total market cap of $42 billion, so which is still larger than 31 billion, but it has been essentially accumulated since 1999. And in 2018, it had roughly 52 IPOs, not roughly, exactly 52 IPOs, and raised a total of 2.2 billion. So this particular market, which is a very successful market, is only a small fraction, is an order of magnitude smaller than this worldwide ICO market. So now private markets, of course, raised a lot of money too, right? So they raised roughly 17 billion at the round just in the year 2017. But of that, it's only about a smaller fraction is really retail. And it's not clear that this is startup money. The important lesson, I think, is this. Is first of all, there's a significant interest in fintech and companies that run on blockchain and that are somewhat affiliated to it. And there's a real appetite by retail investors for making investment in these risky early stage firms. And in some ways, the current markets don't give retail investors the opportunity to make such investments. And so it also shows that it's possible to raise funds directly from investors. You do not have to go through a bank or broker. Now, you could argue that they still have a role and they play a role, and maybe if they went through a bank or broker, then maybe there would be a lower failure rate. But the important point is it is possible, and if people want it, well, people seem to be willing to put the money there. Who are we to judge? Now, however, and I think this goes to my previous point, VCs and intermediaries do provide a service, right? Because money does not substitute for business plan and advice, right? So VC does more than just give you money. And the wisdom of the crowd, while considering how many have failed, is not necessarily a good enough argument here. There's other ways how you can think about tokens, and this makes the discussion very difficult. And what I'm going to present here is only the particular viewpoint that I think is the easiest for you to convey to you. So there are tokens that are used as seigniorage money to power a network. So for instance, there is questions about whether or not these tokens can be sustainable. There's papers by Jonathan Choi and Thorsten Köppel and Eric Budish that basically show that there's limits to blockchain technology, and I'm going to show you some of this in a separate set of slides. There's questions about whether or not cryptocurrencies can have intrinsic value, and there is papers that actually establish how you can find the fundamental value and how people can see this using theory from monetary economics. There's a question of how you can use these tokens to pay for some real costs. And there's also people ask the question of whether or not you can use tokens to pay for ongoing development and in some form of also allowing the token holders some subsequent seigniorage. And there's a paper by Andrea Canido, and there's another paper by Christian Catellini and Joshua Guns that basically studies that. Now, what I'm interested in is this, and what I'm trying to explain to you is the following. Now, we think about these are blockchain platforms are economic transactions with decentralization. In a traditional economy, we have two-sided markets and they have fixed roles, right? So there's consumers and there's producers, right? Or there's consumers, intermediaries, and producers. Now, this is what we think of as centralized economy. When we think of a decentralized economy, it's really everything is multi-sided, right? So consumers can become producers, and this requires some form of platform building. So now there is a large number of papers that also think about how tokens can be used to enable platforms. So for instance, there's a paper by Will Kong and his co-authors which ask the question of what is the relationship between token prices and the adoption of a platform. So if the token price drops, platform adoption will be low, but if the token price is a positive value, then platform adoption, there's an incentive to be participating in the platform. So in other words, what these tokens can do is they can work as a coordination device for people to actually use and engage in a platform. There's a paper by Andrea Candino, which I mentioned earlier, which is basically as how do you use these tokens to finance future development, right? So these are stakeholder tokens, and they allow people to, to achieve some form of payment. And then there's the question of whether, these tokens can be used literally as an incentive for people to contribute to a platform. So all of these papers basically play with the idea of tokens being a means to engage people. Now, the papers that I want to look at and that are closest, the papers that are closest to standard finance are those that take tokens simply as a tool for financing operations. So there's a paper by Chod and Leandres, which shows essentially that tokens lead to underinvestment, except under certain properties that the VCs that could finance a firm have. There's a paper by David Gupta and Rosen, which shows that tokens can be used as a signaling device. So if you retain more token, this is usually a setting where you show that you have an incentive, you're willing to take a stake in this project, and you want to signal to the world that this is something valuable. And there's a paper by Tina Lee and Christine Parler, which show and use tokens as a crowdfunding tool. And what they basically show is it allows producers to attract more of the customer surplus. Now, the paper that I'm going to talk to you about is the paper that I wrote with Katya Melinova. And what we basically think about tokens is simply as the pre-sale of some form of a service, right, or some product that you have. And so in some form, we're going to try to see and contrast this to debt and equity. So let me explain to you how this works.